All right, now, because this is a base material, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my two textures into here. And the way that I do that is you can kind of pull this thing off to the side. I'll shrink this window up a little bit. I will tell you it's a whole lot better if you've got dual monitors. You can actually drag that off into a different monitor. I can't do it when I'm videotaping here, doing screen caps, but if you have a dual monitors, you can take this and pull it off to the other window and keep it up and set it up. And there are tabs up here, and if you have multiple textures open or multiple windows, they'll all be in this little tab thing, and then you can keep them all open and click back and forth. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my textures window, and in order to add a texture into my material, what I'll do is I'm just going to click and hold, and I'm just going to left drag it up here and let go. Now this is a texture sample window. Okay. They all look like this when you're opening something up. Your texture sample window is always going to give you a little preview window here, and it's going to give you these little colored boxes over here. And here's what those things are. We need to wire, because this is all done in this modular format, we are going to wire one image into another. All right, so here's what these things are. I have the entire image, make that go away. I have the entire image right here. I have the red channel, the green channel, and the blue channel. And I forgot to tell you, the textures must be RGB when you bring them over. You cannot bring in CMYK, and you cannot bring in black and white images or grayscale images. They have to be RGB images when you bring them in, because you're going to get these three channels here. These are the three channels, red, green, and blue, that make up this picture. And each of those channels contains a certain amount of information in it, and it does that. And remember, I also said if you're dealing with a Targa or a PNG file, TGA or PNG file, you can have an opacity channel in there. You can actually go in and knock certain things out. That is what this bottom one is. So if I had a pre-made mask built into this thing in Photoshop, I can keep that in there and use it. The importance of that is we need to keep our materials as simple as possible. Materials are going to go on everything. If you have a whole lot of complicated materials, your level is going to become huge and unmanageable very quickly. So we need to do everything we can to try to limit how much stuff is going to go in. Now that image that we have here, I offhand can't tell you exactly how big that picture was. It's probably about a meg in size, and that's just for this one. Now I've also got my normal map, which is about the same size, and I bring it in and I drop it in here, so it's ready to go. Now that's 2 megs worth of textures inside of this material, so I've got a 2 meg material. If I've got bigger images, or if I've got more images that go in there, let's say I've got a metallic and I have a specular and I've got an emissive color and I've got a normal and I got ambient occlusion, I start bringing all of those images in here. It's 1 meg and then another meg, and pretty soon I got a 5 or 6 or 7 meg material on site onto an object, and maybe I've got 100 of those objects in my scene. So it builds up very quickly. So what we do when we're dealing with red, green, and blue is we have an additional channel, if we want to put extra things in. And a lot of times I will do that. I'll hide something into one of these channels, and then I've got it in here, and it all comes in as part of this one. It's not really a separate picture. Every time you add a separate texture in here, you're adding more memory. Now, a normal map contains RGB. I can't hide it into something like this. It has to be its own image. But if I'm dealing with opacity, or if I'm dealing with emission for emissive colors or illumination, I can hide that stuff in here. And you're going to see when we start doing architecture, we're going to do a texture that actually has the windows and moss and everything growing on it. And it's a fairly big material, but that material goes on 13 different components, and you use the same material for all the components of your building. So once you've got that material in there, you're all set. All right, so to make this thing look good, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this over here. I'm just going to click and drag, and I'm going to plug it right into base color. It thinks for a second, and then it shows me what it's going to look like. And you can see that that's kind of what that looks like. It's a little shiny. You can see that light area right in through here. I don't really have any shininess going on in there. And then my normal map is going to get wired right into the normal. And now all of a sudden you notice it looks three-dimensional. It looks like I've got some raised up areas and some recessed areas, and it looks a little bit more like a non-flat surface. Right? Now I'm going to kind of pull these things around over here. And let's look and see what happens with the metallic and the specular. All right. Now, when I need to use a power of something, or if I need to have some sort of a setting for something, this is a metallic slot. But metallic means what? I mean, I don't. Is there? Or am I doing a level of metallic? Am I doing something else? In this particular case, what I want to do is I want to set a metallic value. So in order to do that, I am just going to hold down the number 1 on my keyboard, and I'm going to left click. I'm going to go through a lot of these in more detail in another video. When we start really getting into this thing, I just kind of need to show you the basics of what we're looking at here. So this is a power. So right now it is set to 0, and it says right down over here, when I have something selected, remember, over here my details panel is going to show me what that relates to. Now right now it's set to 0, which means if I wire that into metallic, there is no metallic look. And if I said, well, specularity is a little bit of shininess, it's still getting a little bit of shininess on there, I can wire that same thing into multiple slots. Okay, and now by setting both metallic and specular to a level of 0, now what happens is my object has no reflectivity, no shininess, no nothing. It's just really matte looking. Okay, if I select that and I go in here and I say, well, let's make that a value of 1. And you can see now it almost looks like it's gold. Okay, I've actually turned what looks like what should have been like dirt into something that looks like really bumpy gold or a goldish material, because I've upped the metallic values to 1 and I upped the specular, the brightness and the shininess of it up to 1. All right, now you can go higher than 1. Strictly speaking, it is a 0 to 1 scale. So I can actually go to 2, but it's not really doing much on that because it's 0 is off and 1 is on. All right. Now, what roughness does, and I'm going to add another one in here because it's the actual opposite of this one. If I set this to 1 and I wire that here into my roughness, what I get is it goes matte again, because roughness kind of controls the specularity and the metallic aspects of that thing. So it's kind of gone matte again. If I take that and I set this to 0, you end up with something that looks like this. Now it looks like a reflective mirror. It's reflecting a fake world and a fake sun in there. You can see clouds and a ground plane and all of that stuff. And I end up with something that is highly reflective. But it works in conjunction with the two. It just works backwards. If I take this and I set it down to 0.25, it's not quite as metallic looking. If I go to 0.5, it's even less than that. If I go to 0.75, it's got a slight look to it, but not much. And it kind of offsets the other thing up and through there. Now, you don't have to use that if you don't want to. You can just select something and you can delete it. Okay, and I really don't need to have that in there. I'm going to set these back to 0 because my ground shouldn't be shiny. And I have a base material. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save that. I'm going to close that down. And then what you do is when you want to apply a material, all you need to do is click and hold on it and drag it out and let go. And I now have what looks like this dirt plane right down in through here. Okay, now I'm going to do another one. Let's create another material here really fast. Okay, we're going to call this one M_brick because that was the other brick, the other texture that I have. And I'll open up my textures and I'm going to bring over the two materials and bring them over and drop them in. Okay, I have my diffuse or my albedo slot, and I have my normal, slot so it looks like it's three-dimensional. You really can see in there that it really looks like, if I break that, how flat that looks. And yet, if I put this thing in here, how that looks nice in 3D. And then, it's a good habit to get into. I'm going to add in, I'm going to hold down the 1 key. I'm going to add in this little slot right here. I'm going to put that into metallic, and I'm going to put that into specular because I don't want that to be shiny at all. And I think what you can also do is I'm going to grab, to show you how the ambient occlusion works, what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this link right here. And I'm going to take the black one here from the red channel. I'm going to put it down into ambient occlusion. Yeah, you're really not seeing anything. Yeah, you really have to have, there has to be a texture in there, so that's not going to work for me to show it to you. I'll show you this in another video, how that actually works. But let's put that back in through here. So I've got my bricks, and I've got a two-dimensional thing, and then I'm going to save that material, close that window down, and then go back to my materials folder, and I'm going to drag that right to that box, and I'm going to put it on. Now, the last thing I want to talk about, I'm not going to redo the lighting on this. You notice it says preview back over here because I'm not done yet. What the difference between applying a material to a asset and to a ground plane? This is a brush down here. The brush has its own settings because it's an object that has been created here inside of Unreal. So what I can do in here is I have a section called Surface Properties under my details. And Surface Properties controls that material on a brush. All right, so I can change the scale on this one. I'll go to 2, and I'll go to 2, so I can change the scale, and I'll click Apply. Now it's twice the size that it was, which actually looks a little bit better. Okay, I can move it. So let's say I'm trying to line things up. I can click this. It's moving it 256 pixels, 64th of a pixel, a 16th, a quarter, or I can go in and type in an amount, and I can do it the other way. Gotta remember, there is a way to back those up. I'll have to look and see exactly how to do it. Because you can go, I can try to line it up that way and try to line it up this way. If I go too far, I either have to go back around. There is a key command that you can hold to make those things go backwards. I can also rotate it at 45 degrees or 90 degrees. I can do those kinds of things. And that's awesome. It gives me some control over geometry and putting textures on geometry. This object, however, if I go up and I click on that, I do not have that. That's because an asset that's built in a 3D program has its material, the way that it's formatted is locked into the model. That has to be done in a 3D program. So those bricks are part of that model, and there's nothing I can do about it. If I decide I'd like to have bigger bricks, then I have to go into the material and I have to change the way the material works. But if I'm using it in multiple places, that can be a real problem. If I have two columns and I want one to be regular sized bricks and I want the second one to be enlarged bricks, and I go into the material and I make it so they're really large, it's going to be the same everywhere I go. So everything's going to have the same material. So when you're modeling something on your own, you have to control this using what's called a Uvw map. You have to control that within your 3D program. If you're dealing with brushes or dealing with geometry in here, and it's just something you drag and drop and it puts it in here and it's got collision on it, you have some control over the way that that works. So the last thing I would probably do to this, and I don't have time for it in the video, is I would go up and I would build my lighting. That preview would go away, my lighting would look better, and my lighting and my shadows would actually conform to what appears to be a bumpy ground plane. Because it's got a normal map on it. That's one of the things that Unreal is going to do, is it's going to compute that shadow based off of that material, so it'll look like it's actually conforming to a rough and bumpy ground plane. So that's it for the material, and we'll cover all of these things in more detail later on. This is just a brief introduction into both textures and materials.